Sup Glazers, it's your girl Janice. If you've been alive sometime within the past 71 years, then you may or may not have heard of a little movie called Peter Pan. And if you have heard of Peter Pan, then you might have known about a character called Tinkerbell who may or may not have become Disney's co-mascot, second only to Mickey Mouse. No big deal. With Tinkerbell's growing popularity, Disney decided to make a prequel franchise for the character. These movies were a small yet significant part of my childhood, and I remember watching most of the movies as they came out, and now I want to rank them all. I should state that I don't hate any of the movies. There were only 6 in the franchise, so they didn't really have the chance to make an absolute flop. I actually think that the movie in the bottom spot is still very much a solid movie. I just like the other movies more. Now, without further ado, let's get started. And we start off with the first movie in the franchise, Tinkerbell. I've never been a huge fan of origin stories as they tend to be riddled with moments of secondhand embarrassment, and this movie is no different. There are a lot of secondhand embarrassment moments in this movie. It's like the writers of this movie decided that Tinkerbell should embarrass herself at least once every 15 minutes. However, I really like the lore of this franchise, and of course this movie in particular introduces to Tinkerbell and the other fairies of Pixie Hollow. And the world building of Pixie Hollow in this movie is really good. I really like the idea of fairies being assigned a special talent, kind of like My Little Pony cutie marks. I love how innovative this movie gets with Tinkerbell using lost things to enhance her talent. This movie also introduces 4 main supporting characters: Silvermist, a water fairy; Fawn, an animal fairy; Iridessa, a light fairy; and Rosetta, a garden fairy. I really liked the supporting characters, and I actually ended up finding some of them more interesting than Tinkerbell herself. It's honestly kind of weird how much that happens when I find side characters more interesting than the main characters. Vidya is also a really good antagonist for this movie. She gives off pretty good Mean Girl vibes. The main plot of this movie is that Tinkerbell tries to change her talent so that she could go to the mainland, since Tinker Fairies can't. She tries out water talent, light talent, and animal talent, but not garden talent. I like to imagine the reason the movie skipped out on the garden talent was because the writers didn't know how to make Tinkerbell fail at being a gardener, which I find pretty funny. I really appreciate this movie's message about embracing your identity, but the movie itself is just kinda basic. Nothing I find too special about it. This is a solid introduction to Pixie Hollow and the Tinkerbell franchise, and as the first movie is at the bottom of this list, that means things can only go up from here. I was actually debating whether I should actually tie this movie with the first movie, but I decided to choose one to beat out the other, and the winner was The Lost Treasure. This movie introduces more lore to the world of Pixie Hollow, and that is the Blue Moonstone, which is the source of where the fairy's pixie dust comes from. Every once in a blue moon, a fairy of a different talent makes a special scepter to set the moonstone on, so that when the blue moon rises at a specific spot, it'll hit the moonstone at just the right angle to create pixie dust. This movie displays Tinkerbell at her absolute worst. Throughout the movie, Tinkerbell is constantly blaming everyone and everything else for things that go wrong, which I know is part of the theme of the movie, but I was still annoyed. Tinkerbell is chosen to make this year's scepter, and her obligatory sort of not really love interest Terrace decides to help her out. Over the course of creating the scepter, Terrence starts to get on Tinkerbell's nerves with him overstepping his helping. She tells him to go find something sharp so that he'll be away from her for a while, and brings back a closed compass. She gets mad at Terrence because she thinks he brought her the exact opposite of what she asked for, and she pushes the compass away, which ends up rolling over the scepter, breaking it. Tink blames Terrence for this and kicks him out of her house. She gets overwhelmed with everything that just happened, and she kicks the compass out of anger, which opens it up, smashing the moonstone in the process. Ouch. I also really like how the trailers for this movie try to paint Tink as the hero for saving the moonstone, as if it breaking wasn't her fault in the first place. The rest of this movie is her traveling to a faraway shipwreck so that she can use a magic mirror's final wish to restore the moonstone, which she accidentally blows when she tells Blaze, who is a new character introduced in this movie, that she wishes he'd be quiet for a minute when he buzzes too close to her while she tries to make the wish, which she also blames Blaze for before she finally has her moment of self-accountability. By the end of the movie, she uses the smashed pieces of the moonstone to her advantage. She uses the diamond from the mirror to reflect the light onto all of the pieces, which ends up creating more dust than any other celebration before. Rip to the person that has to make the next scepter, I guess. This movie was okay. It was kind of lackluster, but I liked Terrence's screen time in this movie. The other fairies of the main group aren't in this movie very much, but I really love their autumn outfits. This movie also introduces this franchise's first instance of continuity errors. One slightly important plot point of this movie is that Tinkerbell can't get any extra dust to make her journey to the shipwreck because each fairy only gets a certain ration each day. And they make it seem like that has always been the case for their society. But in the first movie, Terrence casually gives Tinkerbell a double scoop of pixie dust after she tells him she's leaving Pixie Hollow forever, which is just great foreshadowing for all the retconning this franchise is going to be doing in future movies. This is actually the final movie in the franchise before the studio that made the franchise unfortunately got shut down. This movie was meant to be the start of a trend the franchise was going to start where they make movies centering around each of the other side characters. This movie centers around Fawn and introduces even more lore to Pixie Hollow. Every 1,000 years, a green storm forms over Pixie Hollow and the Never Beast awakens to tame the storm. But I guess the fairies who have experienced this over the previous millenniums didn't record this event properly because none of the present fairies understand what's going on, including Queen Clarion, which means she's not immortal, and that opens a lot of new questions that will now never get answered. And the newly introduced Scout Fairies believe the Never Beast is the one causing the storm, and as you might have guessed, Fawn believes otherwise. I'm glad that Fawn got this movie before the studio got shut down because I feel like she needed it the most, as I found her character to be the least distinct from the other main characters. I love how this movie characterizes Fawn, and I don't know if others would agree with me on this, but I love the new design Fawn got for this movie. I love everything about this look, especially her hair. I actually think this new design works so much better for her being the main character rather than her previous look, which felt better suited for her side roles in the previous movies. I love the chemistry between Fawn and the Never Beast, and I also find the Never Beast to be really adorable. He's just so cute. The ending to this movie was just so sad. The Never Beast goes back into its 1,000-year hibernation, which means that the fairies will never see him again, and all the characters are really sad about it and give him a final goodbye before he goes back into hibernation, and the movie ends there. And the fact that this is the final movie of the franchise makes this ending so much more saddening. But good movie overall, and I really liked Fawn's character here. This movie was probably one of the most anticipated movies in the franchise, aside from another movie that will be mentioned in a later entry. It introduces a new character, a dust keeper named Zarina, who is an outside-of-the-box thinker who likes to experiment and question everything about pixie dust. Fairy Gary, the leader of the Dust Keepers, is against experimenting with pixie dust because it's so powerful and so important to fairy life. She ends up doing some experiments with a speck of blue dust anyways, and creates other colors of pixie dust which do other things. Orange dust allows the user to bend light, purple dust allows the user to control wind. You can guess where this is going. Zarina ends up using 2 specks of blue dust to create pink dust, which controls the garden talent. She accidentally spills all of the dust on a plant which grows out of control and ends up destroying the dust depot. Fairy Gary finds out that Zarina was tampering with pixie dust after finding pink dust on the plant and basically fires Zarina, which leads her to leaving Pixie Hollow. Until a year later when she puts everyone to sleep with poppy pollen during a concert and steals the blue dust. The main fairies are able to escape the pollen and follow Zarina and find out she's been working with a group of pirates. And this is also where we find out that this movie is not necessarily an origin story, but a bit of backstory to Captain Hook, back to a time where he's much younger and also has both of his hands. It also gives the origin story to how the Tick-Tock Croc ended up swallowing a clock, getting its iconic gimmick. The fairies try to get the dust back, but Zarina throws her invented dust at them, sending them behind a waterfall and temporarily knocking them unconscious. And when they finally wake up, they're greeted with the gimmick of this movie and the reason it was one of the most hyped movies of the Tinkerbell franchise. All of the main fairies got their talents switched. Fawn is now a light fairy, Iridessa is now a garden fairy, Rosetta is now an animal fairy, Tinkerbell is now a water fairy, Silver Mist is now a fast-flying fairy, and Vidya, much to her dismay, is now a tinker fairy. Oh, did I mention that Vidya is now part of the main group? I'll talk about it more in the next entry. I love how this movie portrays the difficulties each fairy goes through trying to navigate their new talents at first, and explores how they slowly get better at utilizing them as the movie goes on. This is a really fun movie, and I enjoyed it from beginning to end. It very much lived up to the hype the trailers were setting up for it. In this movie, we explore what I assume to be Pixie Hollow's first instant of a fairy meeting a human. This movie introduces more Pixie Hollow lore, that is the fairy camp set up on the mainland during the summer. This is in fact the movie where Vidya becomes part of the main group. Now she doesn't go through an actual arc, she just kinda sort of defaults as a protagonist from the start of the movie. Sort of. She's still very sarcastic and condescending towards Tinkerbell at the beginning, but she's not nearly the antagonist she was in the first movie. She only shows up in the second movie for a single shot, seemingly impressed with Tinkerbell's blue dust scepter, and when this movie starts, she's a protagonist. I guess between being ordered to wrangle all the thistles and watching Tinkerbell's scepter create the most blue dust out of any other scepter before, Vidya had time to reflect on her actions and tone her attitude down. In this movie, we meet a 9-year-old named Lizzie, who is staying with her father for the summer. Lizzie is a fun and carefree kid who has a bright imagination, and as you can probably guess, believes in fairies, whereas her father is a Reddit atheist. But for real, he's a practical scientist that very strictly believes in what has been seen, and is obviously not as imaginative as Lizzie. And as you can guess, this ends up causing conflict between them as the movie goes on. I also want to address that I'm pretty sure that Lizzie's parents are divorced rather than her mom being dead. They don't explicitly state either way, but divorce is the hinted case. And I actually like that it's more leaning towards divorce, since this would be a deviation from the normal route Disney takes when it comes to parents. So I like that they hinted at something new here. Tinkerbell ends up getting captured by Lizzie after she goes inside a house Lizzie built and set up in her backyard, and wasn't able to get out after the door got stuck when Vidya shut the door on her to teach her a lesson about messing with human stuff. Vidya retreats to the camp to tell everyone what happened to Tinkerbell, but as she's flying back, a storm arrives. This movie introduces the lore that fairies can't fly when their wings are wet, which also retcons a scene not from any of the previous Tinkerbell movies, but from the Peter Pan sequel, where she flies directly into the ocean to put pixie dust on the squid to mess with Captain Hook. But anyways, since the fairies now can't fly in the rain, Tinkerbell is stuck in Lizzie's house, and the other fairies build a boat to get to her, since the storm causes the meadow to flood. Lizzie, being an only child and having a workaholic dad, spends a lot of time by herself, and with Tink being stuck in her room while the storm pours, Tink and Lizzie develop a friendship, and I find the chemistry between Lizzie and Tinkerbell very cute. I also really love everyone's summer looks. Now, I feel obligated to mention that the trailer posted on Disney Plus tells a completely, and I mean entirely different story from the one we got in the final product. Lizzie was the villain, and Vidya was the antagonist she was in the first movie, and it seems like she would have gone through a proper arc. And the Summer Minister was going to be in the movie! Spring and Autumn got to be in their movie, so why didn't Summer get to be in this one? It's a shame too, because I really liked her design. Now, almost all of the movies in the franchise have a teaser trailer that's completely different from the movie, before having an updated trailer that resembles its movie more closely. But none of the other movies use their teaser as the one advertised on Disney Plus, and I think that's really funny. I remember seeing this trailer when I was 8 years old after having seen the movie, and I felt really cheated out of the storyline. However, I still liked the movie back then, and I of course like it now. But I do wish I could have seen what the movie advertised in the teaser would have been like. This was arguably the most anticipated movie in the franchise, rivaled only by The Pirate Fairy, and most people's favorite movie in the franchise. And for good reason too. This movie introduces the lore that Pixie Hollow is split into two realms, that is the Warm Seasons and the Winter Woods. Fairies from each realm are forbidden from going into the other realm because the different temperatures would cause their wings to break. Of course, Tinkerbell crosses the border between the two realms out of curiosity, and her wings start sparkling, and we are introduced to the reason that this movie was so hyped up, and that is because Tinkerbell has a secret sister named Periwinkle, who got separated from Tink when her dandelion seed got stuck in a tree and ends up getting blown to the Winter Woods, and their wings sparkle when they're near each other. I love Periwinkle so much. She became my favorite character in this movie, and I wish we could have seen more of her as well as her friends in the later movies, other than when they showed up for the concert in the Pirate Fairy and didn't have any lines. And I also really like the aesthetic of the winter woods. Even though I don't like winter, I can admit that it does tend to bring the best aesthetics. I absolutely adore everyone's winter looks at the end of the movie, especially Rosetta's. They're all so pretty. Now, I should mention the elephant in the movie that most people who watch this movie have noticed, but everything this movie is built upon is a retcon. As I stated earlier, in this movie, Pixie Hollow is split into the warm seasons and the winter woods, and fairies couldn't cross the border. Well, in the very first movie, not only is the winter woods not cut off from the other seasons, but Clink and Bobble fly right through it with Tinkerbell when they give her her first tour of Pixie Hollow. And more so, there was a Minister of Winter who got erased from existence, along with her set of snow fairies, so they could replace her with Queen Clarion's boyfriend, Lord Mallory. Shame too, because I think that the Winter Minister had the best design of all the ministers. Now, as you've picked up from before, this franchise is no stranger to retcons between movies. But this one is different because in the other movies, the retcons are fairly small and could have possibly been worked around or ignored altogether. However, in this movie's case, its very foundation is a continuity error. Without this point, there would be no movie. And as I stated before, unlike the other movies, this movie retcons an entire character. But I kind of respect them for this. Even though this movie's very existence breaks what has been established before, even deleting an entire character from existence, the writers still decided, screw it, we have a baller idea and we are going through with it and you are all going to like it. And we did. I loved this movie when I first watched it when I was 7, and it still holds up 12 years later. This was my favorite Tinkerbell movie ever since I first saw it, and that has never changed. I loved the Tinkerbell movies as a kid, and they still hold a place in my heart. I was so sad that the studio got shut down. I would have loved to see how the movies they would have made for the other fairies would have turned out, and especially how a movie about Tinkerbell meeting Peter Pan would have gone, which I'm pretty sure is what these movies were meant to build up to. Unless they revive the franchise, which I doubt they will, I will always wonder what could have been. Thank you all so much for watching, and with that, I'll see you soon.